Hello, my name is Josh, and I am in History 329 with Professor Smith-Howard. And in our class, we were asked one of 7 questions to do research on based on the South End District of Albany, New York. This was my question. According to the City of Albany's Climate Assessment Plan, the area around the south end of Albany is vulnerable to flooding with increased numbers of extreme precipitation events and river level rise associated with climate change. But floods are not new to Albany. What impact did these floods, especially those in 1913, 36, or 77, have on Albany residents and businesses in the South End? How did these city leaders respond, and in what lessons, if any, do these past floods have for those weather-related events in the future? So before classes went online, I went to the library with Professor Smith-Howard, and I was able to find and use microfilm of the Times-Union newspaper in Albany. I took pictures and used these as my primary document source. I sourced articles from the Times-Union on March 28th and March 29th of 1913. These are the days following the unprecedented floods that swept through the United States. A quick background on the document. The Times-Union is a major newspaper in the capital region of New York, serving the area since 1857 as the Morning Times, while becoming the Times-Union in 1891. It is currently headquartered in Colony, not too far from the UAlbany Uptown campus and right next to Albany International Airport. So back to the flood. In 1913, large amounts of rainfall and snowmelt flooded river systems throughout the United States, including the Mohawk and Hudson rivers in New York. This flood was the worst seen in the capital region in decades, and the water level reached a height of 22.3 feet. The previous record was set in 1857 with a water level at 21.16 feet, so about a 1.5 foot difference. Many businesses were unable to operate due to flooding. Hotels, banks, businesses, houses, and the federal building were overwhelmed with water. Fire engines were used to pump water out of the buildings in an attempt to save flooded items. They did this with the bank to save bonds and securities and other items that were there. The railroads are crippled. The water filtration plant is out of commission, and telephone and telegraph services were interfered with. So communication was down at this point. Residents in the South End and further along Northern Broadway experienced several feet of water in their homes, forcing them to vacate the first floors of their homes or vacate them altogether. This is a quote from one of the articles. Officer Murray of Albany PD lives in a small frame house on South Ferry Street, which is located in the South End, found that the water was 5 feet deep about his home. There are several accounts of this happening in the South End district and along Northern Broadway. There are also several accounts of citizens' livestock and barns being swept away or damaged by the flood. The schools in the South End were also closed for the day because of the inability of children to leave their homes. The flood caused economic activity to come to a halt in Albany, at least until floodwaters receded a couple days later. Flooded bridges and blocked railroad tracks stopped transportation of goods, services, and people coming into and out of Albany until at least March 29th, when the tracks were cleared. Many businesses lost money and wealth in the process of recovery, and several lost their jobs for the time being, and some could not return at all. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the relief efforts done by the city and others during this time. One article titled "Established Supply Stations" describes the effort of Albany PD. It reads this: Commissioner Torres of the Charities Department and Chief Hyatt spent all morning in the flooded South End district. Stores established a food supply station at the first precinct and gathered in great quantities milk, tea, coffee, sugar, bread, and canned goods. Those who were displaced were allowed shelter at the first precinct station and given meals as well. Officer Wassenbach rushed into the first precinct towards 11 o'clock this morning, telling those in charge that those living along Ferry and Dahlia Streets were really crying for food. Ferry and Dahlia Streets are just a little bit north of the South End along Broadway, near that big castle that's the SUNY administration building. The mayor of Albany, Fred A. Roloff, was also on the scene, commanding one of the police boats roaming in the city, and offered assistance to all. Conditions inside of Albany homes were cold and damp and caused sickness to some, and there was worry amongst the medical community whether an epidemic could sprout up. Assistance was given to those in need in these areas. Guild nurses, under the direction of Miss Betts, are working through water-swept areas on police boats, going around to people's homes that need assistance. So those are a few points of assistance that the city gave to the South End district after the floods. So the big question is, so what? Who cares that this area got flooded? Why does it matter? So the South End of Albany has 2 primary zones: the industrial zone, such as the Port of Albany and the surrounding businesses, and the South End residential district, just blocks away from the dirty industrial zone. The people that live here are disproportionately poor and usually belong to minority groups. A flood could set these people back further than others who have more wealth and resources to rebuild their homes or businesses. They're also at a health disadvantage by living so close to industry that the air and water pollution gets into their lungs, food, and drinking water. They are more at risk of sickness than residents that live further away from this industrial zone. And there are parts of many cities across America that have a section very similar to the South End that are at a disadvantage due to where they live. It is really important to realize how different classes of people live and why they live where they do. So for the case in the South End, homes in floodplains are significantly cheaper than those that are not, and especially cheaper if they are near a known source of pollution, such as the Port of Albany. This allows for an individual with not a lot of money or resources to have a place to live and raise a family. But since they are low income, they are extremely disadvantaged in case of a natural disaster, such as a flood or any other emergency. Thank you.